Hola, hola, ¿se escucha? Buenas noches. Muchas gracias a todos por venir a la última conferencia magistral de este semestre en el CEAC. Hoy tenemos el placer de tener con nosotros a Florian Idenburg, fundador de la oficina Soil. Dado que la conferencia va a ser en inglés, voy a hacer una introducción breve antes de cederle la palabra a Marcelo, que era una introducción formal. So, thank you, Florian, for coming tonight. It's the end of our program of lectures of this semester. We're thrilled to have you here. Marcelo is going to be presenting you briefly in a moment, and I'm going to read a short biography. Soil, or Solid Objectives, is an architecture studio based in Brooklyn, New York, United States, founded in 2008 by Jing and Florian Idenburg. It has carried out public and private projects around the world, including pole dance, Queens, 2010, the Kukje Gallery in Seoul, 2012, the Manetti Shrem Museum in Davis, 2016, the Las Americas Social Housing Complex in León, Mexico, from 2016 as well, and the Amant Foundation, featured here in the flyer, in Brooklyn from 2021. Its work has been published in both specialized and mass media, including the New York Times, CNN, Frankfurter Allgemeine and A+U, and is part of the collections of the Museum of Modern Art from New York, the Guggenheim Museum, and the Art Institute of Chicago. Soil has received numerous international awards, such as the Vilcek Prizes for Creative Promise and the Young Architects Program Award from MoMA PS1. Florian Idenburg, who will be presenting tonight, was born in Haarlem, Netherlands in 1975, and is an architect from Delft University of Technology, where he graduated in 1999. Between 2000 and 2007, he was an associate architect of the Sanaa office in Tokyo, where he was responsible for projects such as the glass pavilion of the Toledo Museum of Art in Ohio, USA, and the New Museum in New York, USA, among others. Edenburg is a professor of practice of Cornell University and has also taught at the Graduate School of Design of Harvard University, of the University of Kentucky, and Princeton University, among others. Now I give the word to Marcelo, or Dean, who will be presenting Florian.
Hola, buenas noches. I knew about Florian Idenburg before I knew Soil, really. This happened thanks to a book called Shift, dedicated to the new museum, a project that Florian worked as an associate architect for Tsushima and Nishizawa. I remember that at that time, and now when I was reading it again too, I was surprised by his technical explanation about the most relevant construction details of the buildings. By then, Florian had already built the glass pavilion at Museum of the Toledo Art Museum as part of Sanaa, a project in which precisely Jing collaborated. I take this look back to organize some coordinates. We are facing a team that operates globally from New York, a studio led by an architect of Chinese origin, trained in the United States as an architect, and a born and trained architect in Netherlands, both coinciding at the beginning of their careers in a Japanese office that, in its period of greatest fertility, carried out its first building in the United States. So it must be said that we are facing a really sophisticated cocktail in which I have yet to present a key ingredient, which is the North American Academy. A key area to which they have been incorporated since their landing in New York. The ideal place to intellectualize the large constellation of references and experiences that both Florian and Jing brought with them. Almost 15 years have passed since the founding of Soil. In this time, they have built in Asia, Europe, North America, and South America a large body of museums, cultural centers, art galleries, residential buildings, exhibitions, installations, houses, and different pieces of furniture. Observing their complete work from a panoramic perspective, I recommend you to navigate on their website or better have a copy of their book Order, Edge, Aura. But from that panoramic perspective, it is surprising to see how their sensibility is strengthened when crossing different programs and different contexts. Their project techniques progressively expand with each new experience. If at the beginning of their career they surprise us all with the lightness of their construction, almost always wrapped in ductile and translucent materials, today they are able to hold our attention by maintaining the same perceptive lightness, now also building with precast concrete, bricks, or pieces of terrazzo. Formal and material exploration has probably lost steam in academic discussion in the last decade. In this sense, Soil's work has gone against the grain, demonstrating the validity and enormous potential of these tools to describe our material culture. I am convinced that during tonight's lecture we will be able to explore Soil's work in the best possible way, and that through the proposal we will be able to expand the scope of architecture and its capacity to describe our world. So it's a real honor to have Florian Idenburg here with us in the school, so please help me to give him a warm welcome with a lot of applause.
Does it work? Is it clear enough? Or should I put louder?
Do you have it on? Or is it
I think it's on. Is it on? No? No? On enough? Yeah? Okay, yeah? Very good. Thank you. I would like to maybe turn off the lights. I was supposed to be here with Jing. She actually flew with me yesterday. And we arrived at the airport, but then she was not allowed into the country. So she flew back yesterday night and landed this morning in New York again, where our office is located in the center here of Brooklyn. We live nearby as well. And Brooklyn is not Manhattan. Brooklyn is sort of the other New York, now rapidly changing, rapidly densifying, urbanizing, and in a way, I think also a real interesting site for experimentation and exploration. And we will show two projects that end there. Here's Jing and myself and our team. And as Marcelo mentioned, we've been around, so to say. We've been in many different places in the world, and we decided to work in New York City as two foreigners, because it's a place where everybody is a foreigner and everybody is also a New Yorker. We are indeed somewhat embedded within academia there. It's actually a great way for young architects to build a practice and at the same time make a living. And it means that a lot of our students end up working for us, and also there a lot of the students come from everywhere around the world, so we pride ourselves for speaking 12 languages in the office. And so this idea of borders, and now we are facing it like yesterday or this morning, it seems we are moving towards sort of a new, more bordered world, right? A more isolated world. But a lot of our work is actually about sort of that edge, that line, and trying to see how far we can go to push and press beyond it. We have always been interested in figuring out how far can we stretch things. I told Marcelo I would not only show grids today. I understand that the grid is very important, but we have been very interested in figuring out how elastic is the grid. And the grid is a metaphor, right, for a way of organizing things, a way of structuring things. We've been from the beginning try to figure out, can we find a dynamism? Can we find fragility, maybe a weakness or softness in these systems? Can we discover occupation that we could not anticipate, right? So not the program instilled on a space, but the structure evoking use that you could not imagine. In form and deformation, can we stretch what is legible and illegible? Can we move sort of into the edge of a certain perception? Or in material, can we take the standards of how we put things together and see how far can we push them until they start to stretch too far and break and collapse and fail. And so failure we embrace, because without failure you don't get anywhere. And I think this idea of reality, that's why IRL, in real life, I think we learn a lot in books. We spend a lot of time on screens, but we are very interested in being in the real world and making real things that get pushed back, graffitied over, damaged, but are out there trying to find a way to live. We have been interested in this game of form and sort of revealing and hiding. But today, in this process of playing with these expressions, we've also figured out that the most important thing is actually in the process of engaging, of making things and discovering how and who ends up making your work. This is the gallery in Seoul, which was welded together in a small shop, 500,000 rings in the middle of China. And so we've also recently got more and more involved in ideas of labor, materiality, craft. Who is it that makes our buildings, and for whom do we make these buildings? And working in all these different contexts and worlds, discovering different techniques and different levels of craft. These are the glass tubes we made for a building in Hong Kong, which are in a complete clean room in Germany, laminated 10 meters glass, compared to this guy who's welding our rings together in a small courtyard in the middle of a village called Anping in China. So what does it mean to operate in these worlds with different clients, different techniques, different construction methods and companies to build these effects, to build these borders, these edges, and to see where things fall apart, or where we can hold them together, which I think was the title of this lecture, was Holding Things Together. So I'm going to show 4 projects that we recently built. Most of them actually finished during during COVID. Some of them we've never been able to visit. Actually, the one in Hong Kong, this one we were never able to go to because we have to stay 3 weeks in a hotel, which is fun, but maybe not for so long. The first one is a project that took a long time to realize. It was a competition we won in France, northern France, together with Fricks Architects, a French firm, young French firm, at least young at the time. The competition, I think, was maybe 8 years ago, maybe even 9 years ago. This is Meisenthal. Meisenthal, as you can see, is a romantic little bucolic village near Strasbourg, so really close to the German border in the sort of northwest of France. They prefer to speak German over French, although it is France. but that border has been a fluid border as well. What is interesting about this postcard is that you see that the church is on the side, and in the center of the town, in the center of the village, is a factory. It's a glass factory. They make glass here. They've been making glass here for 250 years. And we were asked to think about this factory and see how to transform it when it went out of business. And so in actually researching the region and understanding how glass itself is made, this is a popular area from 300 years ago where glass emerged, because glass was alchemy. It was a secret, right? How to make glass. It was kept within families, and these families, they were nomadic. They moved through the forest. They found soil, and they found water. They made fire, and they found through the wood, and then they used the air of their lungs, so the four elements to make glass. And it was sort of a secretive, cultish set of families that moved through these forests until two brothers, the brothers Walter, who were the son of one of the master glassmakers, they figured out a way to make it stationary. By the way, they developed a kiln where they could, sort of a house where they could keep the heat going, and because of that, sit in one place. And on the right, you see the factory that ultimately grew out of this, which became one of the main glass producers for many years, Meisenthal glass, in this town. And the church, again, not in the center, but on the side, the center being this factory that is a very pragmatic building, right? A factory building. And so it has been changed, and as techniques developed, things were removed and added. And this project over the oldest building that is still standing is this building from the late 18th century, has sort of evolved until in 1968, the factory went bankrupt. New techniques, different ways of making glass, mass production, etc., took away this economic activity from this region, and now it is sort of looking for its new soul, new activity, and new life. There were three organizations that occupied the three separate buildings. They had nothing to do with each other. There was a glass, like international sort of glass blowing studio, so there was people blowing glass in the big market hall on the side. Is the soccer started or not? Yeah, it's good. Or they were cheering. The old factory hall is used for concerts and arts installations, and the old headquarters of the office here. It was a small museum of the region when the competition. The question in the competition was how to combine these three separate organizations, make them into a new center for glass where they work together. The organizations needed to merge, one for visual art and performing art, one for glass blowing, and this other sort of regional museum about the history of the space. A visitor center, an education center, shop, of course. And so we started to think about all these histories and all these layers of time that had sort of taken place within it, and sort of the sediment, so to say, of that history, which is this factory that consists of objects and elements of all different times. And how do you make sort of these layers, how can we express those, and how can you experience those? And at the same time, we were very interested in the idea of glass as something that is solid and then becomes hard, something that is molten and fluid and then hardens. And so we started to think about the ground as something that maybe could be molten and then at some point, be frozen, if you want, in time and become the project itself. So we took this idea of this layering and the topography and made the project not about making a new building, but really making a sort of new landscape, a new ground on which all these different organizations could come together, could gather around this old factory square that is actually the city square. And rather than proposing a new building, over here, do you see my mouse? Yeah. We covered over the old ruins that you see and made that into the visitor center and the education and ticketing space, with the entry, so to say, under the ground into that central organization. The plan is such that on the top of this sort of picnic blanket, as we start to describe it, we're in France. So we could see still the individual organizations, but then underneath they start to sort of connect and start to work together as a more sort of infrastructural basement. And so here you see the process, and I think it's important to note that time and the aspect of time also even in the construction and in the funding was very important. So the construction I think took over 5 years, and only since it opened in May this year. The first project being done was the factory hall, and then sort of it went we went clockwise from here around, or counterclockwise, from the glass-blowing studio, the factory hall, the visitor center, and then last, the museum. And here you see the crane in a way as a clock going over the site. So it opened in phases, and it just opened its last site. And so when you come, and this is our friend, some of this is Iwan Baan, the photographer who we've worked with for a while. He's been documenting our work. When he went there, what is interesting, you don't really see, you see all these different layers and textures and materials, right? And you see all it's unclear which part of it is actually the project, but in some way it doesn't really matter because the project is obviously the whole thing. I've said I think that this building might be best 50 years from now when it is fully embedded and it is just one layer of these interventions and these transformations of the site. Here you see the old office building. I will later talk about the windows there that we inserted. We completely transformed the interior of this, and it's sort of the beginning emergence of this blanket, this landscape that combines everything together. And so from another angle in the city, again, sort of these many different textures and layers, and here the building itself over the old ruins. And then you enter actually by going under this ground into the central square, and from there you see sort of this landscape unfolding and connecting it, negotiating between these different topographies of these different ground floors. Here the visitor center, cafe, and the education space above. And so you can both engage with this ground by being under it and sort of in it, so to say, or up and above it and overlooking the space, and actually having a new view to the landscape as well. And also on the inside, we try to have you be able to transverse between these different layers. So actually there's connectivity on sort of the lower level, but also on the upper level. You'll see that later as well. And so you can sort of see this ground and how it comes together with the old buildings that sort of wrap around and loop around. The museum, which opened last, I've actually not been yet. I hope to go this summer with the family. You can enter from underneath, and we completely redid the interior. A lot of exhibition spaces. These pictures I just received, which are quite nice. This is a beautiful wooden structure, vernacular structure that wasn't used the space before in the attic, but we inserted these windows to let daylight in and make it sort of part of the visitor experience as well. And from there, you can connect to the glass blowing center. This is the old building. We added 2 structures, actually using some of the old industrial structures, recladding them, making their glass shops, so places to blow glass. So you come in, it's more sort of the educational center, and so we cut a hole in that building to make the glass blowing visible. This is in the old building, and then a new glass studio where it also says that history continues, and this idea of time, ongoing and sort of gelling together is something that I think is also something they very much understand as the theme for the building. And then the last part is this black box theater that we introduced in this old hall. The hall is often used for exhibitions. In the summer they invite contemporary artists, and they also have concerts. Here, these big doors, they hide behind the doors is this more intimate theater, but then we can open these doors towards the large hall. It's a flexible space, and so suddenly the entire orientation of the hall can change, and they can have large concerts for 3,000 people in the hall. And there you see it. And from we take Iwan's helicopter and we fly to Mexico. A second project, which also finished during COVID. Not this. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Infonavit, the housing program, which is basically the mortgage provider in Mexico, one of the largest mortgage providers for sort of the lower and middle classes to basically provide home ownership, right? Through that population, it's a loan by the government in Mexico. And it's a program that produced an incredible amount of housing that looks like this, millions and millions and millions of swaths of these types of homes. They are built by construction companies. Architects don't really get involved, but they are the cheapest way and the only way to meet sort of the standards that Infonavit says. This is great from a country perspective, but really horrible from a city perspective, because it means that cities expand very dramatically and very far out, and so cities cannot support many of these neighborhoods because they're built on the cheapest lands as far as possible outside of the city. They can't bring transportation here, they can't bring schools here, trash pickup, etc. And so many of these places actually remain abandoned because people are too far away from their jobs, and they start to default on their homes, and some of them have turned really into horrible sort of ghost towns. And so this was a problem, and a problem we were asked to in some way engage with when the city of León, through somebody I met in the US, asked us to come and do a workshop. And León, on the right, is the fastest growing city in Mexico. Specifically, it's well, the mayor said it's the ugliest city of Mexico, but it is the city that is the automotive city. So a lot of the car factories that used to be in Detroit, they're now in León. And so in the back you see a Honda or a Ford factory, actually. And so all the jobs that used to be in Detroit are now here, and this is the fastest growing city for migrant workers in Mexico. They're not just coming from Mexico, but all over Middle America, Latin America. And so we were asked to figure out how there could be a new model of housing, but for the same sort of economic class in the city center. And so rather than, we were asked basically to organize a day to talk about this. And rather than having everybody give a speech, we designed a game, and all the stakeholders that were involved, so the banks, the developers, the builders, the housing authority, city planning, and even the user groups, they were asked to make a game together. That we basically gave them scissors and glue and a few blocks, and they needed to make their ideal version. So this is the plan by the developer. It was their ideal version. And there was one from city planning, there was all about green space, but basically it allowed them to articulate what are they worried about. Because we needed to find a way to work together, all these different agencies. And then again, a game allows you to be playful, and it allows you to fail. And this is a way that people are much easier, so to say, in articulating what they think about. And so this went well, and they asked us, well, that was fun, why don't you do one? And they gave us a site to think about. Actually, I should have added you'll see the site later, an image of where the site is, but it is within the old, not the historic city, but within the first sort of urbanization, which is informally built, but now sort of part of the urban core. The people had a hard time thinking about vertical living, right? So it was like vertical living for people that are used to build their own homes. 50% of the Mexican population builds their own homes in an informal setting. So how do we deal with this relationship to the ground, but bring it in a more vertical experience? The double-loaded corridor, which you see here in the middle, if the black are units and the yellow is the corridor, is the cheapest or the space that nobody wants to spend money on, right? Because nobody owns it and nobody cares about it. And so the most efficient way to build a housing project is the one on the left. You have the least amount of exterior facade and the least amount of corridor. Luckily, the climate in León is very agreeable. So actually the exterior wall and the interior wall almost have the same cost. So we could introduce a courtyard, sort of space that connects the community and also allows this relationship to the ground to be visible. And then we thought a housing block How do you find your own home within it? How do you give the home a personality and an address? And so the circulation, we started to twist it and think about how the routing could sort of give a different journey to your home and a different type of experience. And also in the massing, rather than making it all the same height, we worked sort of, it's a corner a lot, we worked with sort of the urban presence of the building, but also a sort of individuality, so to say, of the massing, that you could always say, hey, that's my house up there or over here. So the people were not just sort of anonymous, but that they actually had a personality within the house itself. We developed this with eMovie. eMovie is the housing authority in Mexico City, or no, not in Mexico City, in Leon City. They came, we worked with them through a number of workshops, and this is the plan that came out of that. And here you see it's the one floor up with the circulation, also an exterior stair that takes you all the way up. And most importantly, the homes that have daylight coming in from two sides, and we can have passive ventilation, and windows can open to both sides. Here you see some public spaces throughout. We left some units out that could be collective spaces in the staircase that connects you all the way to the roof. So there were communal spaces throughout. And then we needed to build this for almost no budget. The cost, so this is in US dollars, for 70 apartments was $2.5 million construction. And so we thought we'd build it very simple. We make prefab concrete panels. When you have people walking past your home, you don't want people staring into your house, so we thought we'd make a wall that tilts so that the windows are a little bit on the oblique. There's a little bit more privacy, not somebody is just staring right into your window. We started to flip and play with this perimeter also on the outside to create shade, and to shade some of the windows we wanted a deeper facade. And so we proposed these precast panels, and this was the render, and this project went quite fast. We did this pro bono, and we worked with the housing authority, and we got this solution, and they said, well, it's great, let's try to make it. And they made us a mock-up of the precast panel, which is the one here on the left. And we said, well, it's precast. I wouldn't cast it standing up, but they had thought that it was the best way to cast it standing rather than flat. And this was the result of their first experiment. And they said, but we're also very good at this thing on the left. We can also do that. Right? And so we tried again, and we tried again. And then at some point they said, you know what? To install one of these precast panels, we have to drive a truck to Guadalajara. There's one company that can do it. There's one trucking company, then we need to rent a crane. There's one crane company, they can install the panels. To install one panel, it's the same as having 30 people work for 30 days. Should we not think about how do we distribute the budget for this building amongst a larger group of people rather than the few people that have the tools? Which was a very powerful question, and something for us where we really started to think about. It's like, who do you engage when you build a building? Who are the people that you actually engage with, and who do you allow to participate and be part of this, distribution in a way of labor? And so we asked, okay, what is the maximum that one worker can carry, which is 17 kilos per Mexican law. And so we worked on a block. We developed a custom sort of CMU block, actually two blocks, two types, a standard type and a hinge type. So here's the standard one and here's the hinge, which is exactly 17 kilos, which allowed us to make the geometry that this building had. Because it curves and it is not like simple, we needed something that could negotiate the corner. The window is always 90 degrees, right? The window frame. We had two types of windows, very cheap standard windows, but they always need to be at 90 degrees in the wall. But the wall goes all over the place. So there is the straight, and then there is this hinge. This stone has not the same angle, which means you can rotate it until you hit sort of the right position, and you put in the window, and then you mirror it on the other side. And we made a very simple set of instructions of how to make this. We made one mock-up, and then literally we drew a line from the edge of the slab, 70 centimeters in, and the workers, basically, they just built the wall, and as soon as they hit the line, they put in the hinge point, put in the window, and then they worked again. So it was an instruction, but it was not really a drawing, but only an instruction of how to build the walls. And so suddenly you start seeing a completely different character, right? So you see the hand of the people that build it, and a texture that sort of becomes present. And here you see it finished. And we, like as architects, we always try to align things very precisely. But here, deliberately and intentionally, we said we need to find a way where that doesn't matter, where the expression actually could in some way be sort of loose and fussy, if you want, but still together create sort of this whole. You see one of the open collective spaces here where the families can yell at their kids when dinner is ready. And so now it's sitting there in the middle of this neighborhood in the market. In the weekend, it's the market place. It's very dense and very active. And then when you come in through the doors, you come into this first courtyard. It's these two courtyards. This is the taller one, 5 stories. And then the second one, which is more open with the staircase that goes up here, the communal space that allows you to look out in another communal space up here, and a shared roof actually also up here. And this staircase wraps all the way around. The walls are just this single block, so the inside is flat. We assume that this will all be painted and occupied. So the units, actually the residents become owners of the units, right? So the city gives them a mortgage, but it's all informal laborers that find their homes here. So the first lady and her son who occupied the first unit, she's been selling or doing nail, like basically working as a nail stylist on the streets for 15 years in Leon. And so the city basically gives her the mortgage, and she's living there now in many of these examples. And here the corner is sort of a strong presence in the town. And here you see a little bit where it is sort of located within the city, but very much within this sort of dense, self-built neighborhood as the first project standing out. And it was a successful prototype because there's a competition which was just awarded for this site, and maybe you guys know the firm Arquitectura. They're also doing a project nearby, which is also taking lessons from what was learned here. And so this is a gradual transformation to make the city more dense, to allow people to be closer to the city center and facilities. There's a market here, for instance. And maybe finding a different way to live closer to one another. And so some of these lessons we're taking now to Brooklyn. So the next 2 projects are projects we've done in our neighborhood in Brooklyn. This is the site, this was of the first project, an abandoned church. And so this speaks to some of the interest we have had in housing, in the question of, and we were just talking about it earlier today also, it's like, why is housing, what is complex in housing, and where can you transform and think about housing? And on the left, you see one of our first competitions for student housing in Athens, Greece, and on the right, a prototype home we did in Milan. And both speak about sort of the relationship to the exterior and how you feel connected to the spaces around you, to your neighbors, and to the city itself. The journey between the street, most people are happy in the street, and most people are happy in their home, and most people get super uncomfortable between the street and the home. So that's where we have been sort of investigating. And now, even during COVID, everybody wanted to stay either in their house or be in the park, but just the journey from the street to your home, that's where we need to spend our attention on. The double-loaded corridor as the cheapest place, how can we transform that? And we've been pushing for this and trying this, and many developers says it doesn't work. You're never going to do it. It has no added value. It's not possible. Until we met these young developers with whom we're working now, for whom one is from Argentina, Sebastian Mendes, who used to work at Foster for the longest time and is in New York now, and Sam Main, actually son of Tom Main. So they both know about architecture, and they were trying with this first building for them in New York to radically transform sort of the way market rate housing is appreciated within Brooklyn. On the right, you see that this idea is not new. This is in the Netherlands. Justus van Effe complex, Michiel Brinkman. This is like early 20th century in the Netherlands streets. In the sky, a very popular, dense workers' housing urbanization scheme, very systematically built, thought of in this drawing also about sort of what are our means of production, and this image famous for the milkman coming by in that street on the sky. So street level experience through density at higher levels. The Smithsons also built that idea back in the 60s with their projects, even reenacting the picture of the milkman delivering the milk at the streets in the sky. And so working with those ideas of like thinking about the porosity and the openness and this journey and making that one that it can be more collective and more social, we started to work on this project, which are 18 units, and it's just finished. Nobody moved in yet. I have pictures that we got yesterday, so you're one of the first to see how far we got. Apart from the sort of exterior journey, which you see, where's the mouse here? So basically, although this looks like a very dense and sort of compact, and it is actually very dense, it's extremely dense for what can be built in this neighborhood. You see the typical brownstone homes on at the perimeter, which are individual townhomes. We actually built the maximum buildable area, which is much larger than a developer would ever build, because we not only built the maximum buildable sellable area, but we also built the maximum buildable unsellable area, which is the areas in between the units. And so what you see is an incredible amount of collective space and exterior space, which is everything you see here. And you see 3 individual volumes, actually, with an elevator over here and a staircase in the middle. And this is all exterior, which also means that every unit, so there's 5 units per floor, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, have windows, not just to 1 or 2 sides. 2 is very rare already in the US, but 3 and sometimes 4 sides. This unit has windows to all directions. It's 2 bedrooms and 3 bedrooms, but also every apartment has at least one large exterior balcony and then smaller ones as well. So here, even the smaller sort of 2 units has a large. The condition was that you could have a dinner on your balcony. So also from the kitchen you get in there, from the living room you can get in there, and all the bedrooms also have an exterior space. And lastly, what you see here is on this collective walkway, everybody has sort of a porch, an outside space in front of your front door where you can leave your stroller or your kid's bike or your shoes or what you have, that is sort of semi-enclosed like a porch. And in that, these are all elements to increase sort of the connectivity towards the outside. Construction has now been completed. Here you see it during construction. On the left you see the block. We developed sort of terrazzo cementitious block. Actually, our contractor was from Turkey, so these were made in Turkey, and this is typical New York, where your blocks suddenly come from Turkey because it's cheaper to then get them from the US. And here you see it actually a few days ago. Naho Kubota, another photographer we work with, she shot these. You see the exterior balconies. These are commercial spaces on the ground floor. There's parking on this floor. There's no basement, and you go in here in between the building in this sort of gap. And from the outside, in some way, it looks like a relatively normal apartment building, but then you go through the gate and you come in, and suddenly there is this big, sort of dramatic, deep, double high circulation space. No handrails. The whole space is covered in this mesh. I was only able to get a few pictures from her, but it's really quite exciting and dramatic to walk there, and a little bit scary. But even if you have drank too much, you will not be able to actually fall into the hole because the mesh is very, very strong. The bath and the living room and even the shower has direct daylight, which is a real uncommon thing in New York. So this is exciting because it's the first time we were able to bring some of these values into New York City. And what is great is that we're working now with the same client on 2 other projects that take the same principles, but in a completely different typology. So the next one is a tower, and the other is more of a sort of courtyard type block. So I hope to show those next time here. I'm going to end with a 4th project, which I will show also in a little bit more detail, which is the project Amant, which opened last year. It's an arts organization in this very industrial neighborhood of Bushwick, which is mostly characterized by large anonymous industrial buildings. The box, basically the most standard and anonymous building form, right? A commercial building with no features, specifically no necessarily articulation to the exterior. And this neighborhood is full of them. You see them here all on the right. The client is a person in the arts world who was sad to see that New York became very expensive for artists to be and to work. And so she asked us to create a space, a place, a residency program where artists could come for the period of 3 months, 4 artists at a time, just to do work. They didn't even have to do work. It was just about inviting them and allowing them to be here. As mentioned, this neighborhood is characterized by fences, by industrial sites. This is a mini storage, big boxes, very little, not a very hospitable place, so quite rough. And so how do you invite people into a neighborhood that has such a sort of tough character? How do we find a way to make this place maybe more humane, maybe more comforting? And so we started to think about this idea of an oasis basically within the city. At the same time, we wanted to make something that was not foreign and not other. And so looking at these industrial buildings and the layers and the textures and also the sort of particular characteristics that come with these industrial buildings that always have not systematic sort of orders, but more like opportunistic moves and gestures and forms. And so those concepts we worked into 4 buildings. As you saw, they span basically, this is Grand Avenue, this is Mojer Street. So they connect from here all the way through the block to this big avenue. And in some ways it's more of a campus-like organization rather than a building. We actually first tried a big building, but then the relationship to the exterior we could not create in a good way, and we thought of this more as a porous sort of urbanity where we actually could introduce new sort of streets and courtyards deep into the block, trying to make the most public spaces the ones that are the deepest sort of centered in the block. So there's 4 artist studios. There's a collective space where they come together. There's a performing arts space. There's a gallery space, actually 3 gallery spaces, offices, a bookshop, and a cafe. And so the most public programs are actually the bookshop and the cafe, which we placed right in the middle of this block over here. And then the performing art space and public programming space we placed deep into the block here. So rather than having the public just come in through the front door and out again, we said, how can we bring them as deep into the block as possible and then connect them through sort of small alleyways that connect them on both sides here. This is the collective space for the artists to be and work and eat together. The gallery spaces upstairs here, the offices, again, bookshop, cafe, another gallery space, and the entrance to the very busy street you saw over here. We used the exteriors as sort of buffer spaces and ways to connect. Here in section, and I should say this is an existing building, so this is adaptive reuse, and this is the truck yard for this tile shop that used to be here, and this is 2 new buildings. So how to give this character, right? How to give it a box for art typically is just a box. There's a reason why Chelsea has all the art galleries. They're industrial buildings. There's no features. They're quite anonymous and not a lot of daylight comes in, which is ideal for the arts. But we wanted to give it some character, some humanity as well, some texture, and something that made it more comforting and more as sort of an oasis. And I will first explain the one building on the top here, which is the building with the artist residency, and behind it the performing space, and then the gallery building over here, which is actually a more public program. I mean, you can visit this. So one was that we created a datum at one level. So we wanted to work with industrial materials, concrete, brick, steel, everything we could find around. Most of the materials we were able to buy within sort of a 1 mile radius, but it was about sort of creating this datum, which could be a switch in texture to create a little bit sort of lower and tighter relationship to what we perceive sort of as humans, and not have this tall volume be the same. We did the same on this level. We worked with these different materials and different textures, and then we created sort of idiosyncratic moments, particularities, the light fixture, a window, a volume that pushes out here, or a sort of canopy balcony that pushes out, to give a certain character and maybe a sense of orientation within the space itself. So the concrete building has these two materials, and we try to figure out how within the medium can we introduce these particularities in the way we cast the form, the way we work with different form liners within the formwork, because if you cast concrete, you first have to build it in wood or in formwork, and then you put it in. So it's actually sort of you have to build to the inverse model. We did a lot of testing. We always speak about how important it is to test, to also fail. Actually, this was the first failure over there, and then we did another one that actually succeeded. The same problem that happened in Mexico happened here. All the concrete came out in the bottom because it's very hard to build 10-meter tall concrete wall at once. So the datum was actually also functional because it were two pores, because concrete only gets strong when it gets hard, and if you pour it all at once, it's just like a big bag of mud that wants to get out at the bottom. And so here we start building the formwork, very large standard forms from Doka. It's a company in Germany, and here you see the difference between the bottom texture and then this datum, and then the formwork above, which is a plastic, hard plastic form liner that you have to build into the form. The curved form we had to make out of a different material that could be more pliable, which is the library and reading room. And here you see the rebar, and this is exciting. It's like when you take a cake out of the oven that you were not allowed to look at for the entire period of baking, and then you open it up and you start to peel it away and see, what is there and how did you succeed or not. And luckily, most of it came out well. There are some tricks you can do, but I'll teach those later when you get into it. But there is ways to plaster a little bit over the concrete when it doesn't get as great. The window, which is the window that you see all the way. So I forgot to maybe explain, but basically the idea of creating a sort of secondary pedestrian scale. This is the window. The window can be seen here from the street, so you can see all the way through the entire block. And there is this little window, obviously a reference to a very well-known Latin American architect. And we tried not to, but basically in some way these were all the variations we looked at and thought about, and ultimately finding this sort of, as we call potato shape. The form itself, so this is the negative, right? It's molded, it's a hard foam, and it tilts up because you have to be able to pull it out of the wall, and it also allows all the water to shed, so to say. So here you see it installed in the formwork with sort of it becoming wider towards the exterior wall. Here you see it when it was done, so that water and stuff shed off. How do you get a window in here? You don't cut it in that shape, but you actually put it right behind the wall, just square, and then build the wall around it with the caulking around. For some of the textures and materials, we thought of, again, bringing maybe an element of time into the project. This is the terrace from the collective sort of dining room that opens up. This is a sliding door into this sort of patio. We took cutoffs and sort of debris from local and nearby sites and some of the site itself, and we actually poured them into the concrete itself as sort of a texture, but in some way also introducing an idea of maybe a history that never happened. the other building, the two other buildings, the art gallery buildings, we work with standard bricks from a brickyard and metal grating. Again, we tried and we tested and we experimented. This is cementitious brick, but by a simple rotation, we suddenly could give it a clear expression. And actually, it has two rough sides and two smooth sides. And so we mocked up the entire building with all the different sides with the local laborers to explain exactly, what was its orientation. You could always go back and figure out, this is the way to put the stone. And then every corner and every window penetration, we actually also just sort of built and mocked up like that. So then it was easy for them to figure out where every brick went, because actually we did decide where every brick had to go. So it was very carefully measured and prescribed, but really working with them and understanding what was the easiest for the workers to know of how to install. The mesh above is actually a standard grate, but we rotated it so that you don't look under it, but you actually see sort of more the metal in a very smooth way. And here you see the building that has few openings. As mentioned, art boxes, they don't want a lot of openings. You'll see a few when I take you through the final project. And then the last building was the adaptive reuse of an existing building, but it needed sort of a reclad with the brick. And so brick is made by being extruded through a clay form along sort of a conveyor belt. And they have these, certain bricks do have these sort of score patterns, which are part of the fabrication of the brick. And so normally you don't see them because they're they're on the back side. People use the front side of the brick, which is over here. But we thought if we flip this, if we show the back of the brick, you can actually see sort of the pattern disappear, right? You don't see anymore the way you stack the brick and where the joints are. And so this allowed us to create sort of this much more even pattern, if you want, without seeing the bond of the brick. Here you see they're putting in the electrical strike for the door. And then two more textures where we worked with standard materials. The fence that sort of brings everything together is Unistrut. Unistrut is this material that you use to hang speakers or like ceilings. It's normally hidden behind the ceiling. It's very easy to bolt things into. We thought it would be nice because it gives a certain transparency in one way, and in its rotation because of its depth. It also allows for some privacy because it was all about how do you filter the between the neighborhoods and this space for art and create something that is porous but also sort of strong. And indeed, a way to absorb also all the elements like signage and lighting and what have you within the grate as well. So here you see sprinklers included within it, or light fixtures, doorbells, and even the whole sprinkler or fire system. Which is a way to unify, because the difficulty is we're making 4 buildings. We couldn't make 4 the same buildings. We couldn't make 4 different buildings. We needed to create something of a family. And so also what sort of brings these things together, on the one hand, was this fence that is the perimeter of the project, and at the same time the ground, which we wanted to create. Standard concrete, normally you get a broom finish. You use a broom to give it a texture. Here we made a sort of custom rake, if you want, and decided on a pattern that could be created by this sort of metal corrugated plate that we glued to this rake. And then we worked with the contractors again to figure out what would be ways and techniques that they could control in which there could be enough sort of variety and particularity, but not it becoming a mess. So this is really a dance, if you want, where we worked with what they could navigate, so to say, to create sort of this texture throughout the campus, unifying in a way the ground and giving it also a tactile feeling. If you walk over it, you actually feel that you are there. So here are the final images, and so still a few things we're finishing, but basically it's pretty much done, and you can visit it on Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturdays when you're in New York. Here's the existing building, a gallery building, the other gallery building, and the 2 arts building with the courtyards in between. And so you enter from Grand Street here at the end, all the way over there through the big door. This is a gigantic door that closes, and as it opens, the sign actually changes and sort of sticks out into this lobby, which continues from the street here through a courtyard, and then one step up, a sort of Japanese move in a way into the gallery itself, which is daylit. We reused some of the skylights that were there. We did reorganize them as sort of this vast, sort of large open space. There was no collection. The art program is actually revolving shows. There's a new curator, Ruth Esteves, who does programming here. And so this is not necessarily related to the artist in residence, but there is always this sort of other exhibition program going on. This is the wide space, and from there you continue down the alley. Here we did flip the brick, you see, but organized it in a straight bond into the bookshop and cafe, which you can see from here. A small sort of curve brings you into the first courtyard, from which you can see the other building, and from there up we have the offices, a tall, super tall space. Since there was no collection, as I mentioned, we thought we'd just create three very different gallery spaces: a wide, low one, a very intimate one, and a very tall one with a clear story towards the south, actually, but the mesh on the outside that you see over here blocks the direct light and allows sort of a very diffuse light to come in. And from there, the big sort of marquee, again to indicate to people on the street that the entrance is actually in the back, but also as a balcony for the people in the office to go and smoke cigarettes. And at the end here, the window indicating that something is happening there, through the alley to the other space on the other side, lighting the two sort of paths on the left around it. This is the arts residency building with double high spaces. So the studios are here. Daylight comes in from above. This is all acoustical sheetrock, and so that suddenly the mood and the acoustics really change, and it becomes a very intimate space. This is the inner space of that volume. Here we use felt to line it, so it really becomes really soft with a skylight from above for sitting and reading and just doing really the thinking that is hard to do these days. Sticking out to the courtyard, the terrace, a big sliding door where they can have their gatherings and discussions, and a large, beautiful Thomas Schutte sculpture that they recently put in there, a mermaid watching over the courtyard. That's it. Thank you. Now we can do questions, right? Yep.
Yeah. Hola. Yeah, I was about to ask that.
Yeah, let's do it.
We can open up for questions.
Yeah.
Thank you, Florian, for such a nice and exciting and loaded presentation. It was great to hear you. We have some time for questions now. Perhaps I should do the first. I was intrigued towards the relationship of your practice with digitalization in architecture. You graduated in 99 and in 2000, and you're kind of a generation of architects where digital took a full blow into form, into materiality, and I think there's a very essential quality in your work in relation to form and material techniques, but perhaps we didn't saw so much of the process of how to reach those shapes. So I wanted to know your thoughts on that.
I think for us, the digital is never the goal, but it is a tool.
It's never a
goal.
Okay.
It's a tool, meaning we actually do use the computer quite a bit. We script, we really use it as a tool to expedite the way in which you might organize matter. Meaning we always know that it needs to be made, and in that sense, there's not so many materials we can choose from as architects, right? A cook has way more ingredients than an architect, and so very quickly we start to think, okay, what is going to be the material? But then so sometimes we like to say we like high intelligence but low tech, if you know what I mean. So you use the tool to organize something very simple, like the welding of a ring. But for instance, the ring and I didn't show much of this, has a diameter, has a strength, has a thickness. This is the skin in Korea. We did write the script that allowed us to understand the way it can move, right? Sort of the pliability of this thing. Not because we're interested in that sort of software, but just a way to predict the behavior of how this material would fall. But then we also built physical mock-ups and tests, and you start also seeing that the digital never really behaves the way reality behaves, so it can only give you so much. So I think our process is one that is more, where we use the digital more as a process of form finding rather than creating form, if you know what I mean. And we think that a process, so we're also not so interested, like I think often in the digital you make like a very crazy form and then you figure out, wait, now I have to make it, what am I going to do, right? And then you end up with a lot of bad details. And so for us it's much more the other way around. It's more like the form we find through the process, and the digital helps us maybe predict or sort of approximate what it might become.
Okay, coming and going between the digital.
Yeah, we also built physical models always of everything. Yeah.
Great. I think we have a couple of questions.
Hi, Florian. Thank you. Thank you for this. I have a question. You started the lecture talking about something that I thought was pretty interesting. You said that your studio is somewhat engaged in a game of hiding and revealing. So my question is basically, what is part of that game? What is it that you're hiding and revealing?
I think this comes back to the form question as well. But this becomes a little bit autobiographic. I studied in Delft in the Netherlands in the 90s, where every building was a diagram in a way, and the diagram would be the building, if you know what I mean. So the clarity of the project, the success of the project was the clarity of the diagram, so to say, and you built the diagram. And I felt that in that there is no more imagination left for the other, if you know what I mean. If you maybe know Operta, the open work, the idea of the open work, the idea that the participant, should be invited into the project as well. At the moment that you make everything explicit, if there's nothing implicit anymore, there's no more possibility for participation by the person who is seeing, or the other, so to say. And so the idea of form being not 100% legible, but and sometimes we like to say, when I look at a cloud and you look at the cloud, I see a crocodile, you see the Eiffel Tower. Neither one is correct, but both of them are fine, so to say. And so we've been interested in form that you can never fully grasp. Also in a build, when I went to Delft, the idea was always that you should be able to build the building in one line, and that you could see it, right? Sort of the icon, right? But if you make a building that you cannot fully grasp, it actually allows for more imagination and more mystery, maybe. And that's something that we feel ultimately can create a certain aura, so to say, a certain attraction that people try to grasp but never fully understand. And so I think and Marcelo touched also a little bit on this already. In the beginning, we worked a lot with meshes and veils and soft elements, right, to drape in a way over projects, so you're not completely sure, is it a box, is it coming out? We like to play with the straight line and the curve in a way disappearing into the straight line, so that you're always trying to puzzle together what it is that you're that you're making. If you walk around the building, everything should have a little bit different sort of twist, so to say. So I think it is. We try to do this on different scales with different materials, and it is true that the later work is maybe getting a little bit heavier, as we spoke about as well, or is becoming a little bit more solid, so to say. It has also to do with the fact that they're getting bigger, and more real buildings. You cannot make too many buildings out of mesh. And so we're trying to translate this into, for instance, certain formal moves that are not completely understandable. It's like, why is it this way, so to say. So I think it is something where ultimately we try to do it in order to invite participation and curiosity in, so that somebody can actually have their own interpretation.
Hi, Florian. Thank you for this amazing presentation. I wanted to ask you, because the presentation was, when Marcelo spoke about you, and when Faiden spoke about you, they mentioned that you're a professor at some universities. And I wanted to ask you, because all of your presentations about your projects are sort of taking into consideration the human, the building, the detail, the specific. And I wanted to ask you if when you engage this, if you engage these problematics when you're at university, because I understand that university in the United States perhaps is much more soft with these subjects, and I mean it's sort of something that you really care about. So.
Yeah. I like to teach structure in a way, like gravity. So I often have students start with looking at their favorite structural engineer. For instance, there's many quite impressive structural engineers who have really thought about different ways in which you can work with gravity. Because if the one thing that we control, like there was a moment when program was everything, right? When we were designing. But program is the thing that never actually happens, right? Like program is just permanently changing, and you can use program to buy space, right? You can say, I need so much of this and so much of that, but it doesn't give you anything, right? If you put the word bar on a floor plan, it doesn't make it a fun place. You know what I mean? And so we've been always instructed to work through program, which is the least we can control as architects. The one thing that will always remain there is gravity, at least I think so. At least for the time being, we will have that. And so we will not get suddenly twice as long or 5 times as heavy. So if there's one thing that you need to understand as an architect that might be permanent in your building, it's the structure, right? And so if you can think, and this is a lot that I learned also in Japan, working with Sasaki, is one of the famous Japanese architects or structural engineers who work with Ito and Sejima. Is like thinking through structure, because that's where your architecture can be the most permanent to an extent. And so I think for me, architecture, as you said in the US, sometimes their architecture only has to exist on paper and in a story and in a fiction, which is also really interesting. And fictions and narratives are really important, because otherwise it's just pragmatism and rationalism that governs. But you still need to figure out how to translate those fictions into something that is material and tactile and can be experienced. And then gravity is maybe the best place to start, because that's the most fundamental sort of thing, and everything around it can sort of move around. So that's I teach the students what I think is important, and we work through these kind of things. But we do, we work. I like to also make public buildings in a sense that I think it's important that a building should not just be appreciated from the outside, but that can actually be experienced by people throughout. And so often with the students, we work on a sort of a small scale but public project, so that you can actually talk about not just what it looks like, but also how it is experienced. Yeah.
I really find your work at Fundación very interesting and very, very detailed. I'm questioning architectural projects today about the way that they put the energy on their buildings, all the concrete or things like that. I wanted to know what is your thoughts and how do you see where do you put this energy in the buildings? Because in your first project, when in France, the mold that you built must have been really difficult to make because of the shapes and effects or logic.
Yes. Actually, I was there now, and it's funny because we designed this maybe 8 years ago. And when I was there now, I thought, oof, that's a lot of concrete. And I will say it's really, we're very much developing, and it's quite interesting because I think there's a lot also just happening in our heads, but also in the practice around this. But I think it's not so simple, meaning like the interesting thing of this project in France, it will probably be there for centuries, right, to an extent. And so the difficulty when we talk about energy is in some way, well, first of all, there's good energy and bad energy, right? So there's energy that comes from sources that are problematic, but not all energy is bad. So we should maybe speak about carbon, right? But for instance, these discussions are very there is a lot of subjectivity in these discussions. In Switzerland, they argue that concrete is the most sustainable material because it will last the longest. For, you know what I mean? Like it's there forever. And so the embedded carbon, the amount of carbon you invest in building something for 200 years versus something that, like there's a lot of other discussions. In the Netherlands, everyone wants to make a building now that can be demounted and reassembled, right? So that is circular thinking. So you don't make any welded connections, but only bolted connections. But then the energy for transformation is, for instance, not right calculated within the sort of embedded carbon. So all to say is, I think it's very important. I think a lot of things are happening there. We're working on a building now in the Netherlands that the Netherlands is one of the most strict environmental requirements, and every building needs to generate more energy than it produces. So this building has like one gigantic photovoltaic, like it's one big solar panel basically. But there we had a very big discussion because basically it's an office building, and an office building consumes a certain amount of energy. And we said, why don't we reduce the amount of energy the building consumes rather than produce an energy generating building, if you know what I mean. So for instance, one thing we proposed there was that we, rather than climatize the whole building, we only climatize the place where people are. And so there's a lot of interest in flex working and like working from anywhere. But at the same time, everybody wants to have their own fixed desk. We said, well, why don't we just come in and we climatize the space for the first 50 people in, and then you go to the next space and then to the next space. And then they said, no, we don't want it. We want the building to generate, as much energy as what we need would we make an ordinary building. And I said, well, we're producing, like the cost to produce the photovoltaic cells, the cost to produce an energy-friendly building is incredibly high. And so all I'm saying is I don't have an answer. I do think that we used too much concrete in France. I do think, though, that you need to really start thinking about what is the lifespan of a certain building, of a certain program, of a certain, space. It's complex. I think it's very relevant. I think it's very interesting. I think there's an incredible amount of potential there as well. But it's also, you'll find any answer you want. It's like the internet, like with sustainability. It's like, so, educate yourself around it and figure out how to go about it.
There's another question. Here to that.
Hi. I'd like to ask you about your practice and how do you steer your practice and how that we can turn into a lesson for the students here in the future.
So I went to a Montessori school, and then what was really great of the Montessori school is that in the beginning of the year they say you have to finish this by the end of the year. Good luck. And I'm here, the teacher, as a coach in a way. And at Sana, which worked very well, and we compared it always with Tadao Ando. Tadao Ando was like a little bit down the road. Tadao Ando would make a sketch and say, this is it, and make it. And at Sana, they would say, this is your project. Good luck. And then Nishisa would say, please make it beautiful. That was pretty much the framework, which is very subjective and hard, and also makes it really hard because you never know what it is. But it gives the person working on the project an incredible sense of ownership and participation in the process itself. And indeed, many of the people that work in our office, they used to be students of ours, and in some way that relationship continues. Obviously, so we do start a project typically in discussing what could be the elements that are interesting, both in the particularities of what are the activities that will have to take place here, and also the site, in some way the context, but not just the physical context, but also the cultural and the economic context and the history of a place, etc. And so it typically starts with more like terms and words, and sometimes reference images from different places, the arts. So we like to create sort of a very undefined, soft sort of cloud of ideas. We use the walls a lot. We just put a whole bunch of stuff there, and we sort of draw an outline somewhere in between here is where the project will live. And then we work through iterations and we build models and we start to move towards a space. Sometimes it's more efficient to just make a sketch and say this is it, but it's less rewarding, I think, for the people with whom you work. And so we've had a lot of people who started with us and have stayed with us, for very long periods of time, because people feel a sense of ownership and participation in the project. And I don't know. I mean, it's not the most efficient, right? Because sometimes you search and you search and you search, but it's maybe the one that at least allows us to enjoy working with them.
Are you up for more questions?
Sure.
That's okay. I just wanted three more questions, but I wanted to continue on what Jan mentioned.
Right.
There are a lot of students here, a lot of students who are graduating this year, and I wanted to ask you about the importance of your first professional years.
We discussed that a little bit.
Aside from Sana, you moved to another city, and I think it was a great influence of what came afterwards, and how well you met your future partner there. So perhaps a little word of advice of what comes after school in a way.
The 90s in the Netherlands was a very successful period, and so maybe you've seen this book called Super Dutch, and I was like all this stuff, and so everybody who graduated immediately went to either work for MVRDV or OMA, and that was easy and comforting. And Sejima came and gave a talk, and I didn't understand anything, and so I thought, okay, there's so many things I don't know. I should go to the place that offers me the least comfort, so to say, or the place where I can learn the most, right? So we often are interested in the thing that initially repels, Japan never repelled me, but something that makes you uncomfortable, right? Why is it that you find something uncomfortable? What's the unknown? And then it allows you to learn. We also spoke earlier today, I think for me the fortunate thing, but also something I thought about, was at that moment Sana was 20 people, right? When I came there was no non-Japanese architects working there full-time. At the same time, this El Croquis had come out. It was clear that there was a lot, and then she started to win some competitions outside of Japan. And so I thought maybe, apart from just building models, actually the first day when I came there, I was asked to make a model of a tree. And I worked all night till like 4 a.m. and on this tree. And I went to sleep, and it looked not so great. And I came back the next morning, there was a perfect tree there, which somebody else had made like between 4 at night and like 6 in the morning or something. But I was never asked to make a tree anymore, which was obviously not the thing that I could bring to the table there. I could not be the most beautiful, model tree crafter. But what I could be is the in-between between Japan and the rest of the world, which at that moment, really the office needed some sort of ambassador. And so I had really the fortune of being involved in many of the projects very early on, and indeed being able to build these 2 buildings until I was 32. And so I learned a lot by just, indeed making things. And what I can recommend about making mistakes, it's better to make a mistake when you're working for somebody else than when you're working for yourself. So, yeah.
there are a couple of more in the audience.
For the lecture, I have two questions. The first one is about the name of the building.
Yeah.
I think they already asked you about it, but L is of the initial.
Idenburg, Liu. Yeah.
So is a solid objectives.
Yeah.
Like that. And can you talk about that?
So objectives means ideas, right, or some sort of agenda, and solid means that we need to materialize them. And so maybe also going back to the question about American academia, there is a lot of people that talk about ideas but don't solidify them, and this was just in a way the agenda of the office. How do you translate objectives into something that is ultimately tangible and
More integrate.
Yeah.
More integrate like the idea to the project.
Yeah. So meaning, okay. So you have architecture and you have the building industry, and often a building doesn't make it automatically architecture, but you also have architecture that doesn't get built, which is fine. But I feel it's nice if we can actually, touch our buildings, so to say. Yeah.
And the other question is about you talk about the diversity environment. There's many people in different countries, but I don't know why, but I feel like in different projects, I feel like there's a constant Japanese influence. I know it's like in the Mason Town, like about the layering, what's a little bit Sana or the Warren, the buildings of residents. I don't know why, but it reminds me of the city terrace of the Kanyama. Of the Nico Martin. I know, and this like the view or being kind of like also that I know why like
it's a tree. Maybe it's because there's a Japanese maple.
Yeah,
I think it's we should ask the landscape designer. Yeah.
We need to talk about like how.
Yeah. I think okay. So. I do think that your architecture is ultimately is very personal, meaning you get shaped by things, and leader is Jing, are Japanese architects, but obviously we spend a lot of time there. Jing went to high school there, and she was born in China. When she was 13, she went to Japan and she studied in the US. And it was very influential for me, but if you look carefully, there's also a lot of Dutchness in the architecture as well, and maybe so it's and yes, I did mention that everybody in our office also participates, but it is obviously an ongoing dialogue, so it is something where I think all these influences come together. There's one of our earliest staff who's now actually starting his own firm, but he had a big impact also in the office, Ted Bab, who was very interested in abusing materials, so using materials in the way they don't want to be used. And so some of those ideas, so I think there's a lot of traces, and maybe future historians can unravel those. Yeah.
There's two more questions,
All right.
if it's okay?
Sure.
Great. Yeah,
Oh my God, the real... Yes, exactly.
No, I would like to be back to the question of ownership from another point of view. I'm very intrigued in something that is very intense in your work is how you manage the energy of design. That is also important. I think that the mature architecture nowadays, that you have to deal with everything, you have to have a master plan of how, okay, we're going to focus on this, we're going to leave some things just to happen, and maybe the photograph is like very direct with that, because you have some parts where the design is very specific, you're very technique, like inventions, etc. And there are some other things that you just relax, and you work with relaxation as well. It's like, and I find that also very contemporary for in some point of view. Maybe I just want you to talk about that, how you're very intense in your energy also, and she is more
relaxed.
And your is true that we talked before. Maybe there is a hint about that is very in the DNA of the office. I don't know if that's the answer, but maybe when you should say something.
I think the one thing is, and maybe this comes with experience, is to know when does the project need attention. Meaning, it takes a while, right, between the first conversation and the final image. And indeed, we teach, and we have 2 children, and we do a lot of other things. And a project maybe, design-wise could take a year and a half, right? And the construction another sort of year, or sometimes. And at what moment suddenly do you need to give it a lot of attention, right? That's what we became quite good at. So sometimes a lot of these things you can figure out and things will be fine, but then there's a few moments where you have to say, okay, now I need to, when the budget comes in twice too high, for instance, right? You have to say, okay, now I need to concentrate for a little bit because now we're going to make a bunch of real decisions, right? Or, when the final level of shop drawings come in. So I think we became quite good at understanding when we can let things go and when this is in the process itself, right? But you're maybe also talking about sort of within the building, but I think, I don't know, I think yeah, it is. So, for instance, say the interior housing plans of the Warren project, the project in Brooklyn, I didn't really think about because so many people have an opinion there that collectively there must be enough intelligence that and then if the closet is here or the closet is there, we set the principles of that every unit needs to have a window to at least 3 or 4 sides. There needs to be at least 2 balconies, right? And we don't want to, like every room, if you look carefully, basically every room is in a way a vertical extrusion, and then the next room in some way needs to shift. That was, again, maybe like the blocks in Leon. If you set some of those parameters, then it can play out in a bunch of ways, and then there's building code that pushes back and cost and whatever, but in some way the outcome has those components. So maybe it's more, and I think I like games and the idea of sort of a rule-based, and maybe this is also where even some of the computational stuff can come in, that you figure out form through the establishment of a few parameters that then can generate a variety of outcomes that all behave within those parameters. And so there's maybe, a bunch of different versions of a building, and this is the one that happens to be the one that comes out. So maybe, I don't know if that answers the question, but that's the way, yeah.
One more question.
All right. Yeah.
Hi.
Hello.
Just like the people before me, I'd like to thank you for the presentation. I have the question because when you presented the building in Mexico, something that really struck me was the acute angle that you had goes on the street. But also I thought to myself, if I lived there, how would I manage to put furniture or just live with this angle? And I realized that we're so used to street angles, street architecture, so that's really pragmatic, as you said before. So I'm just really wondering, did you ever have any feedback on your architecture because you're finding such different shapes? And have people ever told you how they had to adapt and how it changed maybe their lifestyle?
The question or the image that triggered that question was the interior of the apartment, right? But I think that that question is exactly the question that we wanted people to ask: is how do I live here, right? Because then suddenly they have to start thinking and participating, and especially the inhabitants of this project will fully transform these buildings and already started, right? So I did, this is one of the most particular angles, but there is particularity. Not every IKEA table fits within every corner, so to say. But it actually means that people become creative, right? And specifically, this is all workshops and craft shops and, literally garages around. So everybody is making and sort of, in a way, used to crafting their own space. So these apartments have already been radically transformed. I'm actually trying to go back and do another sort of documentation now that people have lived there. I also feel the building will be fully painted, right? Now it's gray, but we spoke about should we paint this? It doesn't matter because they're going to paint it themselves, right? And it's going to be like all colors and all of this, which I think is exactly what we're trying to do. So at the moment that you solve everybody's problem, people become completely numb. At the moment that you give a little bit of a twist to certain things, people start to say, how do I live here? And that actually is where they start to make it also their own, right? They start to shape it sort of towards their own place. So that's deliberate. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, Florian, if there's no questions, thank you for such an enlightening conversation.
All right. Thank you, guys.